story is very on point with everything I've been thinking for, like you said, a long time. I think I started thinking this in 2013, I would say, but I didn't know what, like, what is important about what we're seeing in the city of Detroit? Because if people are saying it's not a comeback, some people are saying that, some people are like, we never left. Whatever side of that you stand on, the financial impact of whatever's happening is the reason why we're sitting in this room, right? And that has a direct effect positively on some people in the city, but then you also have $500,000 condos downtown, you know, and it's hard to understand what that, like how to describe what's going on without it saying, yeah, but I think part of what I'm trying to do, I think, is show that whatever's happening is because of the strength of the people that have been here for decades and decades and decades, when everything has been taken away. And you've kind of shown a lot of that.
Thank you. And that's my family, man, that generations here.
When did your family first move to Detroit?
So on my mom's side, they came in the early 60s. So my grandpa and my grandma are from Mississippi. My grandpa came fleeing the KKK. And my grandma was here, I think, a few years before him, I think. And
in the 60s?
Yeah. And my grandma worked at the White Castle that was next to the train station while it was fully booming and operational. It's now I am designing a lab for Detroit youth to learn the world of STEAM in the train station. So.
Did they come through the train station when they moved here, or did they drive up in cars?
They drove, yeah.
Yeah, by that time everybody was driving. That's incredible. I have a lot of people I've interviewed who have told stories of arriving in 1942 from the South, and I think it's a very interesting thing to me that the city, and something I think that should be taught nationally, about how the strength of the people here is what is putting a city in the best position for the next 100 years. I feel like that can be easily missed if you just call it a comeback.
Yeah, and I think I misspoke. I said 60s, I meant 40s.
40s?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So can you say that quote again then?
Yeah, so my grandpa and my grandma on my mom's side came to Detroit in the 40s from Mississippi.
Yeah. So pre-civil rights movement.
Yeah.
Just hearing about, and then he worked at Ford.
Yep. So my grandfather worked at Ford. He worked in tool and die for a long time, and I believe, I'm not sure which specific plant. I think he might have been in Rouge for a little while too, and then eventually retired from Ford. Yeah. And my dad worked for Ford for 24 years.
And how old are you?
24.
I was going to guess 24. Yeah. I'm 42 now, which is insane to think about. I moved here when I was 23 from California.
Yeah.
We did the Bay Area, and then we did Vegas, which was mind-blowing. And I did Vegas 96 to 02, and in 02 I was 20. And then I started traveling the world, working for nonprofit and humanitarian groups now in Africa and Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
Just seeing beautiful people, often surrounded by incredible challenge, but not having that challenge define them. And I think that combined with seeing some of the world's greatest ruins, like in Greece, in Cambodia, in Italy, and then those ruins really have nothing to do with everyday life and don't define the people, but are sometimes cultural icons. When I moved to Detroit, it was like, yeah, these ruins don't define the people, but that's not what the narrative says. The narrative was very much that the people were struggling and that the city was struggling. But the more I get to talk to people, they're like, we had 2 Cadillacs in our garage.
Yeah. Yeah. And that exact point. There is both realities that existed simultaneously. And I think about that in my family and the different ways that those permutations have existed from, in terms of socioeconomically, where people stand. And the interesting perspective that I think, from my perspective, isn't shared a lot as I grew up. When I moved from Detroit, I moved to predominantly white communities, of understanding the spectrum of Black Americans and the spectrum of Black Americans' socioeconomic experience in America. And I think an interesting thing that when I moved back here that I saw was Black Americans who live in communities and kids my age that grew up in communities like Palmer Woods and like Indian Village versus the Red Zone in Detroit. And both of those things exist simultaneously.
What's the Red Zone?
So on the east side, it's like the most dangerous place in the city. Like you never go there. You never heard there?
No.
No, yes. So it's,
But I've probably driven there.
you've probably driven through it.
I try and find a nice person every block.
Yeah.
You know, over the past 20 years at least.
Mm.
But yeah, I mean, but I hear stories, but I haven't experienced it.
Yeah.
So yeah, both realities exist. I think that's interesting.
Yeah.
And I don't want to take all your time, but I find this fascinating, and I can give you a drive with all this information just for your own family history because I think it's important. But the last thing I have to think about is just AI.
Mm.
Bro, it's hard not to speculate where that's going.
Yeah.
And so what is the best way to think about it? I mean, are you, and is it even part of your field?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Can you say that in your own words?
Yeah. Say what?
So like, how are you associated with AI?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, removing myself from whatever organization I'm a part of, I'm a computer scientist, an engineer. And the field of AI is a field within computer science. And I think right now it's interesting because we've been through a couple ebbs and flows of the popularity of the term AI in the zeitgeist, especially in media. One of the first ones that came through, or the biggest ones, the most recent history, is when we were talking about it in like 2013 to 2016-ish era with a lot of the work that Google was doing. And today, the way that I think about it as an educator, when people ask about the field of software engineering, because especially we've heard that software engineering makes so much money and it's so lucrative, and people becoming fearful of tools like AI in that environment because whatever replaces people, et cetera, in every field. I think that just reinforces the need and highlights the emphasis of the need for, one, to ask the question and have the discussion around the fact that let's take it for education and for professions. If you are in school and you can just have a computer generate whatever information for you, I think it's a good thing to revise and re-examine why it should be learned in the first place. And if we are concerned that when people enter the workforce from education, where they're in a space where computers can do what they're supposed to do, and into the workforce, into jobs that computers supposedly can do as adequately, then that begs the question, okay, what should we actually be doing? And then what skills can make you less and less easily replaceable in terms of the outcomes from putting your time and energy, attention and effort into something as a human being. And that's a conversation that in computer science education, I'll speak from that perspective, we have a lot and think about a lot. And I think the core of it is learn how to solve problems. Because that's all everything is at the end of the day. You can frame everything as a problem, and I've learned to do that from my entrepreneurial and design thinking training. Every objective can be framed as a goal and a barrier. And having the ability to think from that perspective is applicable to everything and is on the more complex edge of human capability. And most models of AI are trying to be or striving for at the highest level to replicate the intricacy and capacity for thought and problem solving and complexity that the human mind is capable of, and human minds grouped together when focusing on tasks. So that's my biggest consideration, is how do we cultivate people who can solve problems and be solutionists? Because I think that is the least replaceable or least replicable trait. But that leaves out a lot of people who are in the state right now where they're in positions where it's like, oh, well, maybe I should learn how to solve problems, or maybe I can, but I don't have the opportunity to be in a role where I'm a problem solver and not replaceable in that way. When we think about that domain, which is millions and millions of jobs potentially, right now I haven't thought that deeply about that.
And so with you said that AI has been in the popular narrative, or how do you put it?
The zeitgeist?
The zeitgeist. I find it interesting that Detroit has a couple ties to the way Hollywood has perceived AI. You know, they have RoboCop, they have Transformers filmed here.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
You know, and I feel like that's like humans, you know, are trying to show worlds with that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. I think that Detroit is one of those cities, and as a fan of, I have gravitated in my interest in technology also in dystopian fiction that depicts what happens when technology goes wrong.
Can you say that sentence again?
As I have grown up fascinated with technology, I have been interested in fiction that depicts what happens when technology goes wrong. And for me, it's always something that just kind of reminds me to be thoughtful about the work that I'm doing. At the highest level, that's the most important thing that I extract from those stories, is to be careful about what you do as a technologist. But I think the patterns and the themes that I see regularly they often take what we know today or have known today in the 80s. That's when the proliferation of the genre cyberpunk happened. In cyberpunk, my most regular observation of it is, at the basis level, cautionary tales for what happens if we continue to progress technologically but don't actually solve any of our sociological problems. But you just layer technology on top of it, hoping that it will, which is what we do a lot.
Can you give me a couple examples real fast?
Yeah.
You can drop that.
So I would say that when I was referencing in Silicon Valley how I don't feel like, especially the most lucrative organizations, are the most heavily focused on solving core sociological problems. In my framework of thought, what I think about as core sociological problems are things that the United Nations defines as sustainable development goals. Those are the things that I'm most interested in pouring into. But when we think about at a low level, through the past decade of everybody saying, oh, there's a problem, there's a really complex sociological problem that has many implications and many stakeholders, here's an app that'll fix it. Just trying to put technology on something and be like, will it work? Did it work? That kind of thing. And then also applications of machine learning and artificial intelligence technology in policing in communities like Detroit. There was an instance last year of a pregnant black woman being wrongfully arrested because artificial intelligence machine learning technology was used to determine who a suspect was, and she was wrongfully arrested. Situations like that. And then also, when we think about electrification technology, autonomous technology, there are really complex sociological problems that are there. And I think that there's valid reason to argue that it's worth attempting to see if this is a solution to mobility problems, to sustainability problems. But at the core of it, there's these really complex sociological dynamics that are required to be solved before you just layer technology on top of something and hope that it fixes everything. And that's what I mean by, if you keep doing that over time, but you don't solve any of the wrongs at a sociological level, then you just have really advanced electromechanical infrastructure, devices, ecosystems. But at the core, the human part of it is not healthy. The human community interacting with that technology is not healthy. So you haven't really solved any problems.
Lastly, San Francisco is decentralizing. The tech industry is decentralizing, but I sat next to an Airbnb executive on the way into the Lions San Francisco game. And she's like, but there's, the saving grace in San Francisco currently is the AI money coming in. And I said, that's so interesting to me, because you think that there's saving, that it's just interesting that there's people thinking that something like, to me, AI is something that could replace people eventually, right? So how many years out of funding do you have as a city to sustain your current lifestyle in the AI idea when you're basically also making code that replaces people? Is that a far off assumption? I don't think I'm being too eloquent, or I'm not stating my thought very clearly, but.
No, I think I understand what you mean, but please rephrase one more time.
Yeah, I feel like it's interesting, when I hear AI, I think there's people being replaced by machines thinking.
Yeah.
So if you're a city that's struggling to maintain your $5 to $50 million mansions and 800 square feet for $4,000 a month, AI is not the way to do that. True or false?
I don't know.
Yeah.
But if I look at the landscape from the information that I have right now and think, well, one, you got to define what's the goal. Because if the goal is, in reality, in the rooms where people are making decisions, if the goal is, all right, what's the population of San Francisco?
They have 400,000 houses. That's all I know.
Okay, so let's say there's 400,000 houses in San Francisco. It's do you know if it's 1 million at least population?
Yeah.
I think it's one of the most populous, right?
Yeah.
It's like top 3 or something.
But they now have 60,000 vacant units.
Vacant, of that 400,000, 60,000 are vacant.
Because of COVID.
So that's, okay, so that's half, so that's like 1/8 of
Available units.
the available units. If in the rooms where decisions are being made, some of the decisions that have to be made are explicitly or unexplicitly stated. Who do we want represented in our population? Who do we want, and when I say who, I mean demographics of some kind, whether it's decided to be ethnic demographic, socioeconomic demographic, age demographic, whatever it is deciding, who do we want to be in each square foot of the city by some delineation? They know that they have this high-priced, valuable real estate, that there's a lot of incentive to keep high-priced and economically valuable, and you know that you need people, or that you want people who can afford that to be there. And then you have to think about, okay, we have that pool of population, I don't know how many houses that is, but it's a percentage. And then we have a percentage that I assume they say, well, we need affordable housing for working class individuals. How much of that do you want it to be? So I think determining that at its core informs their behavior. So if the concern is, if they're saying, we're good for a while, we got AI money coming in, which what even is that money really? Because it doesn't make money yet. Every compute that's run for AI right now, overwhelmingly, especially for the things that we hear about in media, costs and burns money regularly. So there's a type of money coming in that's not straight up liquid, but it's just moving around. So I think for them, it's deciding who are we prioritizing, who are we okay with leaving, who do we want to come in, who are we okay with staying in the state that they currently are. There's 40,000 vacant units, but how many unhoused people are there in San Francisco? So
dude, the whole West Coast is, I feel like, about to fail.
right.
But I mean, that's like just looking at breadcrumb narratives.
And so I have no idea. But what I am interested in, and what one of the domains of research that I'm always actively working on, because I view myself being in the city of Detroit as my skill set lies within understanding the connection between society and technology. And what I aspire to do at a very broad level for my overall life mission is to invent technology and music through entrepreneurship that universally improves fundamental aspects of life. That's an incredibly ambitious goal with a lot of ambiguity and a lot of big claims, but it forces me when I said that I was 21 and now I'm 24 and I've been working towards that, to answer questions about what does universal mean? Is it like the people over here, or is it everybody? It's like, okay, well, if it's everybody, how do you do that? It forces me to learn that stuff. And so when I think about myself being at the intersection of society and technology in Detroit and applying technology where appropriate to solve problems, one of the things that I need to understand is, as Detroit being in the state of Michigan, if you think long term, one of the most protected in terms of climate change regions in the country, with huge established institutions of industry and education that are globally renowned. This city, if you extrapolate, I don't see how it won't be a desired destination for a lot of people in the near future. Near could be 10 years, it could be 20 years, it could be 30 years, but in the scale of time, that's the near future. And so for myself as a decision maker and leader in the city, what I have to think about and consider and have conversations about is, how do we set ourselves up, learning from San Francisco, learning from New York, learning from LA, learning from Chicago, to one, handle an influx of people in an equitable way, in a sustainable way, but then not making the same mistakes and learning from the mistakes of San Francisco, of other counties, cities, to say, if we develop something that's socioeconomically booming, that's great. But then we have to think about how to protect that and what does it mean to protect that, and what does it cost to protect that. So I don't have the answers for San Francisco, but I am learning and looking and observing.
So what's your most excited, like what are you most excited about, or what do you think of the opening of Michigan Central Station, like June 6th? What are you thinking that day?
I have a few thoughts. I have an individual thought, I have a family thought, and I have a community thought. So as an individual, one of my goals is this is my accountability calendar for guitar. And one of my goals is because when I have badge access to the train station, I'll be like one of a very few people that do. I'm gonna record a set, like an hour-long set of me playing in the Grand Hall. So that's a personal thing that I'm very excited for.
I'll film that if you want.
That would be fantastic. That would be awesome. And then as a family goal, I'm very excited to walk my grandparents into the train station and say, I designed this part of this train station. And I'm so excited to see their faces as people who have been in the city for decades and seen everything in it, every up and down of it, to be able to say that our family is a part of this, at least resurgence in this capacity, at least the resurgence of this trademark of this bastion of the city representing something great for the future.
I'll film that.
I love that. It'd be great. That'd be awesome too. And then from the community, specifically for the June 6th opening, I'm happy for my community of people working on the problems of the city of Detroit and its problems. And what that means is the Michigan Central team. That means every team that's partnered to bring this vision to fruition and move the needle forward. I'm very excited for that and for them. I think a lot about being a conscious teammate with them, in that they're under a lot of constraints, and that there's really great people here who want to do the community-based, prioritizing the community well-being work, but we are under constraints and trade-offs under a broader quarterly, how does this make money system. And so I feel a lot of compassion for that team as they approach that grand opening. For the community as a whole, I'm excited for programming to begin that's community-based. I think that we won't reach full capacity of what the train station and what this mobility innovation ecosystem being developed means yet when it opens, but it'll represent a milestone and it'll represent progress towards that vision. And I think I also see a lot of unexpected interest that comes just from that environment being open, and creative people like me and you doing cool creative things in that environment, putting that into the world, and then people around the world seeing that and be like, oh, that's a cool creative thing. I want to go be a part of that or see that.
Bro. I don't even know, man. That was just so good.